Let's focus once more on the economy, and tomorrow afternoon the President will release the reconstruction and recovery plan for our economy. But really it's very difficult to have a discussion about the economy without factoring in the devastating impact of corruption. And let's chat now to independent analyst Khaya Sithole. Good afternoon, Khaya. Thanks so much for your time. You know, before we get to what the President is likely to tell us tomorrow, I have to ask, you know, you're an accountant, and I'm sure watching the bail application for Angelo Agrizzi and that money trail that the NPA has been able to, and investigators were able to find, that he's managed to move over 33 million rand offshore. Did you enjoy that particular tallying up process?
No. I can't say I enjoyed it. I was more horrified by the fact that, you know, at this stage where you think people would be aware that we are only looking to try and persecute them, that they would still be taking chances and trying to move money offshore in a manner that makes it very obvious what their intentions are. So it was quite surprising that somebody like Angelo Agrizzi, who came to the fore, who came to prominence on the basis that he had had an evolution in the way that he had come out and said, I'm going to expose all of these things, was actually at the same time planning on what was clearly going to be a getaway plan. And the fact that the National Prosecuting Authority was then able to track these money flows is a credit to them, because now we can clearly see what his intentions are. And of course, the decision not to grant him bail makes sense on that basis.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to clean up corruption, you know, and by his own admission, Agrizzi was involved in bribery and corruption. If found guilty, surely that money, which possibly a large portion of it is taxpayers' money, should come back to South Africa. Do you think that'll ever happen?
Yeah, we're hoping so, because at some point in time, the NPA then has to sort of then try and identify which of those particular funds that he has were probably the proceeds of crime, and then say these are the ones that we definitely want to somehow get back into the state. So it's not going to be an easy process, but I think today the focus was on the fact that in the absence of any other theory, the reason you were moving all these amounts offshore, the reason you hadn't told anyone that you had an Italian passport, now you're saying that you lost it, simply means that your intention was to obviously skip the country. And of course, not only are you a material witness in a lot of the cases that you've exposed at the State Capital Commission, you yourself are an implicated person that has to stand trial. So I think in that instance, it was a no-brainer what the decision was going to be.
Well, thanks for your comments on that. Let's move now to what we're all waiting for, which is 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And the President is going to tell us more detail on this COVID recovery reconstruction plan for our economy. You know, as I've said a number of times, I think we all know, we've all diagnosed the problem, but it's how to get to an economy that is growing. And it was quite interesting that the Finance Minister has asked to present his mid-term budget a week later than planned. Do you think that that is because his vision for sorting out our economy does not match the vision quite of the Economic Advisory Council to the President, some saying that the Finance Minister's remedies would actually kill the patient? It's just too austere.
Look, I think at the end of the day, we have to make peace that with the fact that our Finance Minister is as good at communicating as he is at cooking. And I think the reality here is that when the statement came out yesterday to say that it asked for a postponement, it would have been important for him to explain the basis for seeking this particular postponement, rather than to gravitate towards a generic statement that says it's because of COVID-19. And that makes absolutely no sense, because at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that the timetable relating to when the budget was supposed to be tabled is something that has been known for quite a while now. So it's difficult to imagine what it is that he anticipates is going to happen over the next 5 or 7 days that then suddenly, dramatically changes what it is that he was putting together. And the problem I have with the Finance Minister, who's so clumsy in communicating, is that at the end of the day, his credibility and his ability to communicate is a fundamental part of how we are able to then negotiate with the people that we may have to go and borrow money from, which is clearly one of the things that needs to happen. And I think in this instance, it leaves people more anxious rather than comfortable. And it's really just unacceptable that he can simply drop a statement that says, oh, by the way, I need another 7 days because Cabinet has taken some drastic decision. That doesn't actually help us understand what it is that is on the table. And of course, we need to have this done and sorted out urgently, because we have an economic crisis and we cannot afford to simply defer the tough decisions that need to be taken.
You know, the Business Day put it so well this morning that South Africa's caught between a rock and a hard place, that we need to spend to encourage growth, but at the same time we have to cut spending to deal with debt. And if indeed it is these two sort of different views on how to fix our economy, what are the pros and cons here of each option?
I think the most important thing that we always need to make peace with is the fact that borrowing, for example, is not the issue itself. It's the question of the quality of the spending. So when you're trying to ignite an economy like ours and you do not have any resources left, it's now a question of, if you go out and you decide to borrow, what is it that you use those funds for? And of course, in our case, there's always been this problem of the quality of the spending, because if you go and borrow and you take those funds and then you invest them in the type of projects that are going to end up with 2 or 3 or 4 more people employed tomorrow, which means you've got 4 taxpayers tomorrow, that on its own is a much better way of spending public funds. Our problem is that in far too many instances, we go out there to try and raise funds to deal with historic issues, to deal with historic wage bills, rather than investing in the future and trying to identify which parts of the investment allocation method are going to lead to us being in a better off position, with us generating greater taxes and us being able to employ more people. That is the dilemma. And of course, if the finance minister is going to go out and borrow money just to fund what is clearly an unsustainable wage bill, just to fund an airline that is simply not going to be profitable, then we do have a problem. Borrowing is not the issue. It's the quality of the spending that we should be querying.
We know, however, that there will be massive pushback from the unions, and it seems that when it comes to difficult decisions, there's a fair amount of prevarication, which is what we've seen with SAA. Do you think that the President will make those tough choices, ultimately?
It's very difficult to imagine that the president has now developed the courage to make difficult choices, because if you remember December 2017, one of the strongest corners that pushed him into the presidency was the union movement itself. And of course, for them, they believe that because the multi-year wage agreement, for example, was signed, it is sacred, it is sacrosanct. And on that basis, they refuse to budge, on the basis that, well, if you end up with not being able to afford this, go and find out how you as a state ended up in that position. So we've reached a deadlock there where the unions do feel that a multi-year wage agreement needs to be honored. The state states that there's no money. So it's going to be very difficult for the president to not only break a pre-existing wage agreement, but to also then start cutting the civil service, which is what some of his own economic advisors have said. They've also said that, there's a moral hazard issue associated with the everybody else has had to cut costs and cut wages, but the civil service hasn't done so. I don't know if the president has developed the courage to actually face them, particularly ahead of local government elections next year.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Such a key point you make. It's the quality of spending that's at stake here. Independent analyst Khaya Sithole.